Got to show up game day.
Adrian talked this spring, maybe on his podcast, about making some slight mechanical adjustments too. I mean, does that ever stop with a quarterback, or are they always sort of tinkering and trying to optimize?
I think probably what he was talking about, if you were to really drill down on it and ask him, it was the drill work that we had always been doing, but he started in earnest in January. And so, when you do that, it just feels like you're just going for a walk. The ball just comes out of your hand. You don't even think about it anymore. So the ball just becomes an extension of your vision in terms of where you want it. So I think that's what he was talking about in terms of his work.
With Heinrich, you talked about, I think Frost mentioned a couple weeks ago, the sort of fire hose mentality of all this information that the young guys have to process, and in particular him. How have you seen him try to get ahead of that curve, and where is he in that?
Yeah, that's a great question, and typically that'll show up when a guy is playing slower than he probably should in terms of athleticism. That he started getting faster with his feet and going through his progressions towards the end of spring. He was much more comfortable, and that's starting to show up now. He's starting to play faster, quicker.
Over the years, we've asked you all manner of depth chart related questions. Do you, ideally, have a clear number two? Is it possible that in X situation it might be this guy, but maybe in a different situation somebody else?
The competition for that position is still, as Frosty has mentioned, is still going on. Yeah.
One step beyond that, Logan was just saying that he's not just pushing for that number two spot; he's pushing for Adrian's spot. So
I hope
so. See for this group, as far as how they're competing with one another, not just for that backup spot, but for Adrian's spot.
And it's a good group of guys, and they know how we are about that. We want them to compete, and they don't have to necessarily be Goombas with one another, but they got to support each other. We're just fortunate that the group, they care for each other and they like each other, aside from supporting them. And so, that's how I want them, and how Coach Frost wants them to be, to compete. Yeah.
So, hey, how has what you do changed maybe in the last, 20 years? I mean, since you were at Rutgers to now, how is coaching quarterbacks maybe a little different than it used to be?
Well, I don't know that the equation that governs at least the throwing part of it is going to change. The ultimate, if you're talking about a behavioral objective that governs that, it's you want the quarterback to be able to generate maximal, optimal, final, linear velocity accurately, point blank, period. I mean, that's it. And so from that standpoint, the drills that you use to get that generated aren't going to change, really. But within the framework of each guy's a little bit different. And I guess that's the art of coaching the position. The way Heinrich is going to process information about XYZ isn't certainly the way that maybe Adrian or Logan or whatever is going to process. You have to find out how that happens and how best can I as a coach facilitate to ensure that learning curve in whatever domain we're talking about is as steep as possible.
And is it frustrating to know that there are times when you might only have a year or two with a guy because he's going to leave? Is that frustrating? Because it happens. I mean, it happened with Tristan. It happened at your previous stop too, I'm sure. So,
well, I wasn't around Tristan very long, but right. I know exactly what you're talking about, Sam. I don't know if it's frustrating, but you get a guy tuned up.
Yeah.
You get a guy tuned up and he's ready to play at a high level, and then now would he have been able to do that at any other place? I don't know that. But
that has to
because what we do in terms of the training of the position is pretty unique. But I understand exactly what you're saying.
Have you had to?
I guess more than anything, it's a little bit disappointing. No, I'm gonna. When they're here, man, I have an obligation because of Coach Frost in Nebraska football to coach the hell out of those guys the best I possibly can.
Hey, Coach, over the spring there was always some talk about looking at maybe a transfer quarterback. What did you see from the spring and the offseason that said, you know what, let's ride with the guys that we have?
I think Frosty felt comfortable with. Seeing Heinrich, I think he felt comfortable with that, and knowing that the next piece of the puzzle was just getting him to understand the playbook and play fast and that sort of thing. He's always felt really good about Logan's decision making and his ability to play fast, and then it was just a matter of getting the stroke tuned up. So I think he felt good about that.
Is there some, like, we've watched very little of practice, and Logan didn't get a ton of opportunities in the
Yeah.
spring game. Is there something about his game that we and fans maybe don't know that you really like, that you get to see in practice, that if he goes out in a game we'd then see?
Well, I just know, like in spring, just working through some of those mechanical issues, you know. I think Frosty made a tremendous point when you guys had talked to him. You know, when you're thinking about those things, generally that makes it something can sometimes make it worse, right? But it just takes reps and reps and reps and drill work and isolation drills to ensure that the ball just comes out of your hand like it's nothing. And he's pretty much at that point right now. You know, he's a slider guy. You know, it's like taking the comparison between John Elway and Joe Montana. Let's say John was a pretty big cat. He was always going to generate a little bit more thrust on the ball than Joe, just because he was a bigger dude. You know, the mass piece of it. But Frosty feels good about where Logan is right now, and I do too.